Have you ever thought about how towns and cities just kind of grow randomly? A building pops up over here, a new neighborhood over there, and it all seems kind of haphazard.
Yeah, like an unplanned jumble.
But then on the flip side, you have these communities that were meticulously designed, like with an overarching vision from the get-go.
Planned communities, right?
Yeah,
I bet you've wondered how they work, the pros, the cons, without drowning in a sea of technical terms.
exactly. And that's why today we're diving deep into a particularly intriguing example, Reston, Virginia.
Reston is a great example of how people tried to create a whole new way of life, not just build houses.
Right, and we've got a ton of amazing sources for this deep dive. We've got historical records, design documents, and we'll trace how Reston has changed over time.
It's going to be fascinating to peel back the layers and see how Reston's original vision is held up.
So let's set the stage. Picture post-World War II America. People were moving out of cities in droves.
The classic suburban boom.
Yeah, but those early suburbs, they often lack something, wouldn't you say?
A sense of community, for sure.
Right, long commutes, not much to do nearby. So this idea of planned communities gained traction, like, hey, let's do suburbs differently.
They offered an alternative, a chance to build places that were more self-contained, more thought out.
And at the heart of this movement, at least when it comes to Reston, is this guy named Robert E. Simon Jr.
The mastermind, right?
He established Reston on April 10th, 1964. And get this, the name Reston actually comes from his initials, R-E-S.
Wow, that's dedication. I guess he really put himself into it, literally.
Totally. Simon wasn't interested in just slapping up houses. He had a bigger vision, right?
Oh yeah, much grander. He wanted to create a place where people could truly live, work, and play, all within easy reach of each other.
It sounds pretty utopian almost, blending convenience with nature and a strong community vibe.
But actually, if we look back, this idea of planned living wasn't entirely new. Think about the Garden City movement, for example.
Oh, right, from way back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Exactly. It advocated for these self-sufficient communities that blended residential areas with industry and lots of green space.
So Simon was kind of building on those ideas.
He was, but with his own unique twist. It's like he took inspiration from the past and applied it to the modern suburban context.
Now, Simon wasn't just some random developer. He came from a pretty impressive background. His family was deeply connected to Carnegie Hall in New York City.
I read that he even served as its president for a while.
That's right. So he probably had a strong appreciation for culture and the arts, which you can definitely see reflected in his plans for Reston.
It's like he brought that big city sophistication to this suburban setting.
And interestingly, Simon's father had actually been involved in developing Radburn, New Jersey.
Another early planned community, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it was quite influential pioneering concepts like separating pedestrian and car traffic and creating these lovely shared green spaces.
So Simon had firsthand exposure to these innovative ideas even in his childhood.
Makes sense, right? Growing up around that kind of forward-thinking environment must have shaped his own vision.
Definitely lay the groundwork for his own ambitions.
Now, let's talk about the foundation of Reston. Simon established 7 guiding principles for its development.
The pillars of his vision, right?
Exactly. First up was housing for all. He wanted a mix of housing styles and prices so that people from different walks of life could live together.
It sounds great on paper, but wasn't there an issue with affordability early on?
You're right. The sources indicate that Reston initially struggled to provide housing that was truly affordable for everyone.
It's one of those things that's easier said than done. You have to balance social goals with economic realities.
Right. The cost of construction, the market demands, it can be a tough balancing act.
Yeah, it's a reminder that good intentions don't always translate into immediate success.
Now, the second principle was live work and play. This idea that you could do everything within Reston itself.
No need for those soul-crushing commutes, right?
Right. It sounds ideal, but it seems like it took a while for that to fully pan out, at least in terms of attracting major employers.
I think it was the development of Reston Town Center much later that really brought the work part of the equation into focus.
Yeah, it provided that central hub for offices and businesses, so it wasn't instant, but it eventually materialized.
It shows how these things take time. Building a self-sustaining community doesn't happen overnight.
Okay, third principle, importance and dignity of the individual. This emphasized a human-centered approach to planning.
Putting people first, basically.
Yes, thinking about the residents' well-being throughout the design process.
Not just focusing on buildings, but on creating a truly livable environment.
Then we have beauty, structural and natural. So we're talking about attractive buildings, but also preserving the natural environment.
Yeah, that seems like a key part of Reston's identity. It's not just concrete, it's integrated with nature.
And the fifth principle is accommodation of leisure time, making sure there are recreational and cultural facilities right from the start.
Simon recognized that people need more than just a place to live and work.
Right. Leisure and culture are essential for a well-rounded life.
It's about fostering a vibrant community, not just a housing development.
And that leads to the sixth principle, amenities from the outset. Things like a library and even golf courses were part of the plan from day one.
It's about creating a complete community right away, not adding things as an afterthought.
And finally, there's financial success, which is obviously crucial for any project of this scale. But as we mentioned earlier, Simon faced some financial struggles early on.
It's a reminder that even with the best intentions, you need a solid financial plan.
Yeah, balancing those grand visions with the nitty-gritty of costs and revenue.
It's a lesson that many developers can learn from.
So we've got these 7 principles, but how did they actually play out in the design of Reston?
Well, first, Simon acquired a massive piece of land in Fairfax County, 6,750 acres.
That's a huge chunk of land.
It is. And then he brought in this New York architectural firm, Whittlesey, Conklin, and Reston, to create the master plan.
Were they big names back then?
One of the partners, Julian Whittlesey, had worked on Radburn, actually.
Oh, wow. So they were carrying that legacy of planned communities forward.
Exactly. And their plan for Reston was full of innovative ideas. For instance, they incorporated mixed-use zoning, which meant that residential, commercial, and recreational areas could exist side by side.
It's so different from the typical zoning practices back then.
It was a radical departure, really. And they prioritized pedestrians, creating these separate pathways for walking and biking.
Again, borrowing from those Radburn principles.
Absolutely. And then there were the green spaces. They made sure that nature was woven throughout the community with interconnected parks and trails.
It sounds lovely. And didn't they also have this idea of distinct villages?
Yeah, each with its own little center where you could find shops and local amenities. It was all about creating a sense of belonging within the larger community.
So it wasn't just one big, massive houses. It had these smaller, intimate neighborhoods within it.
Precisely. And architecturally, early Reston, especially around Lake Anne, had a very particular style, often described as modernist or even brutalist.
Yeah, I've seen pictures. It's definitely striking.
It was, and architects like James Reston and William J. Conklin were key in shaping that aesthetic.
Now, speaking of Lake Anne, I heard that the design of the plaza there was inspired by those picturesque Italian hillside towns like Portofino.
It's true. They envisioned this vibrant, pedestrian-friendly space right on the water.
It's interesting how they blended those European influences with the modernist architecture.
It shows the breadth of their vision. And it's worth noting that Fairfax County actually created a special zoning category just for Reston.
Really? What was that about?
It was called Residential Planned Community Town Center Zone. It basically allowed for the kind of mixed-use development that Reston was pioneering.
So they had the county's support in creating this innovative community.
It was a collaborative effort in many ways.
Okay, so we've covered the vision, the principles, the planning. When did Reston actually start to become a real community?
The grand opening of Lake Anne Village Center in 1965 was a defining moment. It was the first tangible expression of Simon's vision.
It must have been exciting to see it all come together.
Oh, absolutely. And people were already moving into Reston by then. The first residents actually arrived in late 1964.
So it was already becoming more than just a blueprint.
It was becoming a place where people called home.
But as we mentioned before, there were some serious financial difficulties in those early years.
Yeah, unfortunately, high construction costs and slower than expected sales put a strain on the project.
And that ultimately led to Robert E. Simon being forced out in 1967.
Gulf Oil took over, forming Gulf Reston, Inc. It was a major turning point.
What happened to the vision under Gulf Oil's leadership?
Well, development continued, and they did add some affordable housing options, like the Cedar Ridge apartments.
So they were still trying to fulfill some aspects of the original plan.
Yeah, but the priorities might have shifted somewhat under the new ownership.
Then, in 1979, Mobil Oil acquired Reston.
Another big change. They established the Reston Land Corporation and continued development in new directions.
And under Mobil, we finally saw the creation of Reston Town Center.
Right, that was a major turning point. The first phase opened in 1990, and it really transformed Reston.
It became a true live work-play hub.
Exactly. It was the missing piece that brought the whole vision together, even if it took longer than expected.
And in more recent years, the Silver Line Metro extension has added another layer to the story.
Oh yeah, the Metros has had a huge impact, making Reston even more connected to the wider D.C. area.
And it's spurred further development around the metro stations.
Like a whole new chapter in Reston's evolution.
So throughout these changes, there were key figures who shaped the community. Obviously, we have Robert E. Simon Jr., the visionary.
And the architects, James Reston and William J. Conklin, who brought those modernist designs to life, especially around Lake Anne.
And what about Vernon J. Walker? I know he was a champion for Reston's green spaces.
He was the first director of open space management, and the Walker Nature Center is named in his honor.
And Embry Rucker, the Episcopal rector who founded the Common Ground Foundation.
The Embry Rucker Community Shelter bears his name. He made a real difference in people's lives.
It's inspiring to see how these individuals left their mark on Reston.
They were dedicated to making it a special place. And let's not forget the history that predates Reston.
Right, like the A. Smith Bowman family who ran a bourbon distillery on the land before Simon acquired it.
And even before the Bowmans, there was Carl A. Wheel, who had his own vision for a town called Wheel in the late 1800s.
It's amazing to think about the layers of history beneath the surface.
It adds depth and richness to the story of Reston.
So let's fast forward to today. Reston has grown a lot since its early days.
Yeah, the population has been steadily increasing. As of 2023, it's estimated to be around 66,070 residents.
Wow, that's a sizable community.
It's definitely become a bustling suburban hub. And the economy has shifted as well.
In what way?
It's gone from being mainly residential to being a major employment center, especially for tech companies.
Makes sense given its proximity to the Dulles technology corridor.
Exactly. And in terms of infrastructure, well, we've already talked about the metro.
And the Dulles Toll Road was a major improvement for accessibility back in the 80s.
Oh, and let's not forget about the Reston commuter bus system.
That was quite innovative for its time.
It was. It showed their commitment to public transportation from the early days.
And of course, there are more schools, libraries, and community facilities to accommodate the growing population.
Reston has expanded its infrastructure alongside its growth.
Now, with such a rich history, are there efforts to preserve Reston's past?
Now, the Lake Anne Village Center is actually a designated historic district.
Oh, so its unique architecture is protected.
Exactly. And the Bowman House is also a reminder of the land's earlier history.
And then there's the Reston Historic Trust Museum, right?
Yes, they do a fantastic job of documenting and sharing the story of Reston.
And the Reston Association manages those 1,300 acres of open space, right?
That's right. They're committed to preserving the natural beauty that's so integral to Reston's character.
So how well has Reston managed to stay true to those 7 guiding principles over the years?
You know, it's done a pretty good job, especially when it comes to mixed-use development and preserving green spaces.
Those seem to be deeply embedded in the community's DNA.
But there have been challenges, of course. Achieving true socioeconomic diversity is an ongoing effort.
And the growth of Reston Town Center has raised some questions about maintaining that original small-town charm.
It's that tension between progress and preservation.
And the sources mention those community debates about density, green space, even paid parking at Town Center.
Yeah, those are all signs of a community grappling with its identity as it evolves.
And it's not immune to the broader economic forces that shape real estate markets everywhere.
Those ups and downs definitely play a role.
So, as we wrap up our deep dive into Reston, what are the big takeaways? What's the overall story here?
I think it's a story about the power of a big vision, but also the complexities of tuning that vision into reality.
And the inevitable challenges that come with growth and change.
Exactly. Reston has seen its share of those, from those early financial struggles to the shifts in ownership.
But through it all, Simon's core ideas have remained remarkably relevant.
And it's had a real impact on the way we think about planning and development.
Reston was a pioneer in many ways, and its influence is still felt today.
It's a reminder that we can create communities that are more livable, more connected, more in tune with nature.
But it also takes hard work, compromise, and a constant dialogue with the community.
It's an ongoing process.
So for you, the listener, the takeaway is that even with those bumps in the road, Reston's story shows that a well-conceived vision can have lasting power.
And it raises some questions, too.
Like what?
Well, how can we apply those lessons from Reston to create intentional communities in our own time? What aspects of Simon's vision are most relevant in today's world?
Great questions to ponder. And if you're curious to learn more, we encourage you to explore the sources we've used for this deep dive.
And we'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about Reston.
It's a fascinating case study that continues to inspire and provoke discussion. Thanks for joining us.
Binge Radio, audio without limits.